please. Let's see. All right, welcome to the wonderful world of the National Register of Historic Places. Everything you wanted to know about it, and maybe a little bit more, or maybe not. We'll see how it goes. So the National Register is the official national list of significant historical sites and districts that have been deemed worthy of preservation in the United States. As discussed earlier, the program was established as part of the 1966 Historic Preservation Act. It's overseen by the National Park Service, which is an agency of the Department of the Interior, but applications go through our office first. Today, there's almost 100,000 individual listings across the country, encompassing about 2 million individual resources. Here in West Virginia, we have over 1,000 listed sites, about 1,092 as of this week, and that's about 24,000 individual resources. Because when you establish a district, you have multiple resources inside that district, and so all of those get counted as well. So what listing does and doesn't do? Listing, for most purposes, it's primarily an honorary designation. It provides some national recognition and prestige. It's always nice to have, own a property that's on a nationally recognized historical list. It provides very limited protection from state and federally funded or licensed action. That'll be discussed more in the Section 106 seminar. A property on the register, whether or not it's eligible, whether or not it's individual or if it's part of a district, it is eligible for matching grants and historic tax credits, both of which will be discussed later on. And what listing does not do. There's many misconceptions about what the National Register means for your property. Both opponents and proponents of listing have misguided ideas of what it does. A listing does not restrict the use or sale of a historic property. It doesn't require you to continue maintaining the property. You don't have to open up to the public for tours or inspections or anything. While you are eligible to apply for funding, it doesn't guarantee funding to restore or preserve the building or any kind of perpetual maintenance. And it doesn't protect the property from being demolished. Hypothetically, you could list your house and burn it down if you wanted to. We prefer that you don't, but it's technically legal. And you don't get a free marker for the property. The Park Service does have a little list of places you can purchase a plaque, but we don't provide the plaques ourselves. So our office's role in the process is multifaceted. We evaluate properties around the state and give professional opinions as to whether or not they are eligible to be listed. We commission surveys, either with our own funding or with grant funding, to send experts into the field to help identify any eligible sites that we're not aware of. When people write nominations to submit to the Park Service, they bring them to us first, and we review the drafts and comment and help them produce a good, well-written nomination that we think could pass. And we also serve as the middleman between the public and the National Park Service. Every step of the process goes through us first. We talk to you, we review your materials, we send them to the Park Service when it's ready to be done, and we just we keep all the records of that. So there are a set of legal qualifications for a property's eligibility. In most cases, a property has to be at least 50 years old. There are some exceptions, but they are fairly limited. The property must retain historic integrity. No matter how old it is, it still has to resemble its original appearance, or it has to have alterations that are historic, as discussed earlier. If you have a really old house, say like an 1880s farmhouse, but it's got replacement windows, a different kind of roof, vinyl siding, maybe a garage, a new garage attached to the side, it doesn't have enough integrity to be listed. There has to be owner consent, of course. An owner anyone can write a nomination for a property, but the owner of that property has to consent, or at least not object to it. They have the right to object, and if they do submit an objection to our office, then the nomination process is halted. And finally, you have to meet one of at least 4 different criteria of eligibility. And these criteria, A, B, C, and D, are basically the guidelines that explain how your property is significant. Like a property doesn't have to be just old. It also has to be important in some certain aspect of American history. And the first one is criterion A. It's any property associated with a historic event or historic trend. And this is probably one of the broader criteria we have. There's so many different things you could apply under criterion A. Examples include transportation history, so like train stations, bridges and stuff, agriculture, farms, commerce can be any business, a store, a bank, a shopping center, community planning and development, education, so any school, recreation, ethnic heritage, industry, so factories and warehouses, politics and government, that can be courthouses, post offices, jails, military, mainly battlefields. The example in the picture here is the Buxton and Landstreet Company store in Tucker County. It was listed under criterion A, I believe, for commerce as a early 20th century coal company store. Criterion B is a property associated with a significantly historic person or people during the productive part of their lives. That's kind of the key part. It's a property that an important person has to have, lived or worked in during the period of time in which they accomplished the thing that made them important. There's not too many examples in this state. A few noteworthy ones are the Memphis, Tennessee Garrison House in Huntington. She was a prominent NAACP officer and a civil rights activist in the early to mid 20th century, and a well-known educator as well. And then you have like the Z.D. Ramstow House, the Taylor Wellington House, and they're both Civil War era properties. Don Chafin House in Logan County. And criterion C, it's a fairly common one for many properties. It's for a property that has an excellent, well-preserved architectural style, an engineering technique, a landscape design, something produced by a master craftsman. Basically, it's all about the appearance. It can apply to like houses, buildings, parks, certain cemeteries, bridges, public art like sculptures and fountains. A lot of older, especially Victorian era houses are listed underneath criterion C. And there's a wide variety of properties listed underneath that. Julianne Square in Parkersburg, it's a whole neighborhood full of these wonderful Victorian era properties. This house here is very noteworthy for its elaborate ornamentation. All the properties there were listed under architecture. There are other things like the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, a memorial arch in Huntington, Berkeley Castle, the Palace of Gold in Marshall County, that big, very nifty Hindu temple from the 70s, very unique architecture that's not seen anywhere else in the state. That got listed. Then criterion D is defined as a property with the potential to yield additional significant information. And this applies mostly to archaeological sites. You have to argue that there's a place with artifacts or ruins buried in the ground that hypothetically one could dig up and look at the materials and learn something new about a certain aspect of history. In most cases around here, that's for Native American sites. The Great Creek Mound in Moundsville is one key example, the Native American burial mound. It can also apply to more modern archaeological sites as well, such as abandoned coal camps, and certain cemeteries can qualify. Probably the most well-known modern-day example in this state is the Blair Mountain battlefield in Logan County. It's where the big West Virginia mine wars reached their peak in around 1921. There's a lot of bullets and guns and old entrenchments buried up in the hills over there. So it got listed for the potential to do further archaeological digs there and learn more information about the battle there. So there is a multi-step process for getting a property listed. This is a common question our office often gets. So if you want to list a property, you first reach out to our office. Usually that would be me or Jessica Eichlin, our newest employee. They would talk to us about the property, describe it and ask, what do we do next? The key thing people have to do is submit what we call a historic property inventory form or an HPI form. It's like a 2 or 3 page basic biographical sheet, just giving us the basic info about your property. It should have a couple pictures of the house, a map of its location, address, building materials, date of construction, style, if known, coordinates, stuff like that. And preferably, you should discuss in the paper what is important about your property. It might be old, but what is significant. Perhaps try and tell us which of the 4 previously mentioned criteria the property would qualify under. And we have copies of this template available on our website, and we can also email you copies on request. But a person or an entity would fill out this form and send it to us, preferably by email. We have up to 30 days to review the HPI and determine whether or not it is eligible. Sometimes we request to go on a site visit to inspect the property in person just to get a better idea of its look and feel and materials. But we don't always do that. It just depends on how much material you send us beforehand and just the circumstances behind it. So assuming we review the HPI and we say, yes, your property is eligible, then the person is free to write a nomination form for the property. And anyone can write one. It doesn't have to be the property owner themselves. It can be a nonprofit group, a local historical society, a paid consultant, a historian, a history professor. We've had all kinds of different people write nominations on a property owner's behalf. And we do have copies of the template form that we can send to you upon request. And the registration form is a bit more detailed and comprehensive than the HPI form. You have to include a narrative history describing as much history of the property that you know and make the argument for why it's eligible and under what criteria it is eligible. Kind of like a high school persuasive essay. Make the case for why you think it should be listed. There should be a good physical description of the property. List all buildings on the property, describe what they look like, any nifty architectural features, and what their current condition is. And plenty of photos, maps. If it's a single building, we need floor plans and site plans, things of that nature. The drafts of the nomination get sent to us. Each time we receive a draft, we have up to 60 days to review it. We don't always take that long, but that's how long we're legally allowed to take. And we review it and we send back comments. It's not uncommon for us to request that a person makes revisions to their draft. Maybe we feel like they need more information in a certain section, or the map isn't done properly, or the pictures aren't quite right. So there's kind of some back and forth between us and the writer, and there's some revision processes. Eventually, when we get a final draft that we think will work, we send that nomination to the West Virginia Archives and History Commission. They're a body that meets 3 times a year to review nominations, among other matters. And if they vote to approve the nomination, then we send the paperwork to the National Park Service for final approval. They can either say yes, they can say no, or they can kick it back to us and request that more changes be made. And during the process, we do have to notify the property owner as well as any local officials. Could be the mayor, state delegates, county commission, and we try and notify local HOCs too when applicable. Normally only if they have CLG status. Oh, I guess that's it. 2 very important resources for listing a property are National Register Bulletins 15 and 16A. 15 describes the different criteria for eligibility. You can read that to help determine whether or not your property is eligible to begin with. And then 16A provides step-by-step directions for how to complete each section of the nomination template. Extremely useful. It'll be your best friend for writing any nomination. And digital copies are on the website. We can also email you a copy or even mail you a paper copy upon request. So that's it. Do we have any questions, complaints, concerns, comments? Skip.
Cody, how many of the nomination forms are submitted by consultants, and how advantageous is it to have a consultant do it?
Let's see. Most of the ones I've received are from consultants. Bear in mind, I've only been here a year, so I haven't gotten to see very many. But a consultant would be a wise choice if you want to guarantee that the property will get listed and in a fairly timely manner as well. We do offer a survey and planning grant, a matching grant to help subsidize the cost of a consultant. And we offer that once a year. Typically, if a person goes the grant route to hire a consultant, from the time you submit the grant application to the time the property gets listed, takes about, I think, 9 months to a year, give or take. I think you're on mute, Meredith.
I was going to say, all of you who are CLGs get a nice little incentive there with the survey and planning grants, because you get a 70-30 matching grant as opposed to the rest of the general public who gets a 60-40. So it's very useful.
Yeah. Chris?
Hi there. Just a very, very quick question, but here in Beverly, we have a district, and if there needs to be a status updated on any of the buildings, would we write to you and Meredith just to say, hey, this is the situation with building number X, Y, and Z, or is there a procedure that we need to follow?
Like what kind of status change?
So the crackhead who lives at one of the houses in the historic district has basically demolished it.
Yeah, well, you're not legally required to notify us of changes, but if you want to have the changes on the record, we do have a documentation procedure called, well, it's called additional documentation. And it's kind of like an addendum or an appendage to the old nomination. And I can send you info about it later, but basically you'd send us like a short statement explaining what has changed. Like in this case, you would say this property, the address, name, or whatever, has been demolished or significantly deteriorated to the point that it's lost integrity or no longer exists. We would send that to the Park Service, and we would attach that onto the file of the original historic district nomination. And for the future reference, it wouldn't be considered listed, the one property, not the whole district.
Right. That is something I would wish to consult with the other board members before we took any official action on. I just, before we voted on it, I just wish to know what the procedure was for that. So thank you.
Certainly. And Kristen, thank you for the comment. Anyone else?
The other thing I wanted to quickly mention with CLGs is that one of the criteria of being a CLG is continuing to update your register and inventorying properties and things. So if there are properties that you think should be listed, or at least we should be aware of them, then maybe an HPI form might be a great way for your commission to get that on our radar, or potentially thinking of updating your National Register listing or creating a new district even. So it is one of the tenets of the CLG program. So that's kind of, the reason for the National Register discussion here today. Okay, well, with no other questions, I think we might turn it over to Susan Wood, who's our GIS expert here at the SHPO. Because as Cody has kind of given you a great foundation for HPIs and everything, it's also really useful to use those documents that have been created for your own research and things like that. So she's going to show you how our programs work and what resources are available to you all.
Thank you, Meredith. Set now. Everyone can see? Yes? Can everyone see? The black screen?
Yeah. Yes, black screen, yep.
Black screen, there it is, okay. Well, thank you very much for being here this afternoon. My name is Susan Wood, and I'm the GIS coordinator for West Virginia SHPO. And of course, if you have any questions about today's presentation about the map viewer and a new online platform we're rolling out slowly, which is GoApply, please contact me by email or phone, and then my information will be on the later slides. Just overall, the map viewer, a lot of you maybe have already looked at it before. We've had it around for about 17 years, I believe. And it is a map, online map, interactive map for professional consultants, state and federal agency employees, and the public to make informed decisions with regard to cultural resources locations here in West Virginia. And it's free to access and available to everyone. And this graphic I have here is a graphic you'll see on our website of a link that will take you right to it. So, and also down the lower left, I have a link to it that you can, that'll be on every page of the slide, or every slide. And the reason, the principal function for the map is a quick and easy approximate determination of identified location of cultural resources. And more importantly, it reduces time delays and costs historically associated with inquiries directed to the SHPO office. So now, 24/7, as long as you can get online, you can do your research yourself instead of having to come here to Charleston, to the Culture Center, and do any research. So it's very helpful, saves time and money. And important here, if there's any doubt in determining the location of a resource, it is recommended that the SHPO be consulted, as they are the official stewards of all cultural resources for the state of West Virginia. Just a little background, I've been here almost 2 years, and I know the map isn't perfect, but we try our hardest. And if we're missing an older architectural survey or something, just let me know, and I will try to get that up as soon as possible. And the map has 2 map views. We have the public, and that will be architecture, the cemeteries, and the National Register sites. But then we also have a restricted view, that is archaeological and the Civil War sites. And you'll need to go through a approval process with our senior archaeologists to see if you can view those restricted layers. It's real general. There's 3 categories to the map. This is your base map, where you can change it. Maybe you want to look at a Google type of map. Maybe you want to look at some photo aerials of the area, and there's quite a few options. Second type is we have the reference layers. Maybe you want to pull up parcel boundaries. Maybe you want to pull up an address, water around roads, just to get a better view of what the area you're looking at. And then our SHPO cultural resource layers for the public are the National Register, the Architecture Inventory, HPIs, and surveys, and cemeteries. Just overall, the map viewer is a great research tool. We have all 55 counties, including towns and cities. We have over 90,000 cultural resources that have been mapped, including archaeology. And the key part of this is it's linked to the HBIs. It's linked to the National Register forms, so you can open those up and print them and save them and use them for whatever you would need. And overall, once again, it includes HPIs, the National Register nominations, cemeteries, architecture surveys, and archaeological forms and surveys. So here's just a screenshot of what you would open up, and we can browse through them up at the end of this. But just overall, if you have any questions, we've got some links here. You can contact Cody, the National Register Coordinator, or Jessica, the Architectural Survey Historian, or myself, the GIS Coordinator, if you have any questions. And there's many links on the website for the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History. And I can show you that after that. So if you open up the site, you're going to get an overview of West Virginia, and the only layer you're going to see is the National Register sites. You can see here they are in purple, and there is a cluster. We're just going to see some things here of Berkeley and Jefferson counties. But yeah, like Cody said, we have 1,100 or so, or 1,000 or so of these. I'm going to zoom in here to the city of Lewisburg, and I want everyone to look at the legend here on the left. Oops. Yeah, so here we have the blue dots are the HPI locations. So if you were going to select one of those, it would bring up some information and you could find the form. And in this one, we have this purple, which is the National Register. This is a historic district for Lewisburg. And so you could select that and bring up the reports. And we've got 2 new features here. We've got demolished in gray and demolished for the hatch for the area. So if you wanted to see a National Register site that's been categorized as demolished, it will be there. And just another screenshot here. If you were going to, at the top bar here, sort of searching around, if you were going to search Zoom, and we could see by address, ID, name, which would be our site ID, or maybe you have a name. For example, maybe you're going to search by Dale or Eleanor or some other smaller spot. You can do coordinates, the name, city. We're going to search by Weston or county or USGS quad. And now we're in Weston. We've zoomed in. You can see the light shading here because I've turned down the historic district just a smidge. And you can see the blue dots for the HPIs that have been mapped for these properties. And here I've selected here in red. It's 501. It's the city. It's right outside the historic district. So let's see what happens. This is what will pop up here on the right side of the screen. We've got what we use here in the office for the site ID reference number is LE-0258. And LE is the abbreviation we use for county, which is Lewis County. So this is the 258th HPI we have in Lewis County. And got some information here. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the architecture sites, the HPIs, they do not have a lot of information here listed like this one, though. It will have the site ID, and it will have the county and the quad and the link to the report. That's very important. That's what gets you going. And also I want to mention these parcel ID links down here. These are great too. You can link to the West Virginia Property Viewer if you want to look at this property on another site to get some information, as well as an assessment of the property. And here is just the, as Cody showed before, just the HPI that you will open up, review from the map. And here, this map, this HPI is 8 pages. It was, let's see, 501 North River Avenue. Has some information here, lots of great stuff. It was done on January 15th, 2018 by some consultants. So we've got HPIs, we have about 70,000 maps. And all the good information will be in the report link. We don't have our fields quite updated yet, but you can glean the information from this. And so let's browse around at a National Register area. And you can see here, we are in Wheeling. I've searched by the city of Wheeling, and Wheeling has quite a few National Register districts. So I just selected one, it's in red, and I selected the National Road Corridor Historic District. And our reference number is 920000874. And lots of great information. It was listed in a criterion C, and its list date was in 1993. And so right here, we can open up the report for this, as well as opening up a photo from 1993 or so. So little black and white photos. And so here is the page. We have a 41-page National Register Historic District registration. And so all of great information here. Whatever you need to know, can tell you how many contributing buildings, non-contributing buildings in this district. So lots of good information. And another cultural resource that you can find here, a layer we have, is architecture surveys. And I'll be honest, you might look around your town or city and go, hey, we've got something here, and it's not mapped, and it might not be mapped, so please let me know, and I will get that mapped as soon as possible. Actually, this Ravenswood Architecture and History Intensive Survey of the Old Town was not mapped. Someone brought to my attention at the end of last year, and it's in there now, but it wasn't, and it was just 16 years old and slipped through the cracks, but it's up there now, and this is highlighted. And so there's a lot going on in this map. The green hatch are architecture surveys, and sometimes some of the counties have a county-wide survey. So you can turn on and off the layers to sort of zone down to what you want to see. But this purple here is the historic district, but I've selected architecture survey for the Old Town of Ravenswood. And if let's say I want to open up that report, well, here it is from 2006. It is 166 pages long. And lots of great information here. Tells you a little bit here. This is the name of the report. For our site ID is RJA-05. So this is Jackson County, our 5th architecture survey here. And our HPIs for this survey are from 0028 to 0298B. So about 270 HPIs were collected for this survey. And like I said, they were not mapped, but they're in there now. Just let me know if you're coming across something that should be there. And another one, cultural resource layer that's available for the public are cemeteries. And this cemetery here is in Morgantown. Just to highlight what's available, we have our site ID for in-house is 46-MG-285. So in Morgantown, it's our 285th cemetery. And for the county, Monongalia. And it's Oak Grove Cemetery. And this survey was in 2009. So we're opening up we're gonna open up the cemetery, and here it is. This is 4 pages long. It's just a screenshot of the front page. There's lots of great information. Could we have, family names and access and history and whatever you're looking for. And like I said, questions about the map viewer, we can browse around it after this, but there's a lot of information on there. It's user friendly, but let me know if you have any questions. And so for something new, we're slowly rolling out here is our Go Apply. It was open for survey and planning grants at the end of October. We had 10 people submit with few headaches, which is always good. So we're gearing up to get all of our applications through there, including HBIs, apply for a CLG, as well as submitted annual report. So working on it as we speak. So it'll be easy to use, it's free, of course, it's available 24/7. And just to start it, you'll just need to create a login and then search under opportunities to what's there. And I'll go through that. Like I said, you can apply for a grant. The development grant for 2024 is up there now, and that closes March 31st. And you can also apply for CLG status, but you guys already have that. But what will happen is we'll submit the CLG's annual report. So I'll reach out to you so you're already in the system, so you will go into just submitting the CLG report. Once we get that up and running, completing an HPI form, applying for a scholarship, submitting a Section 106 review request. We are hoping to get everything under this Go Apply umbrella soon. This little screenshot of what you see when you get to the page. What you new users would do is register a new account, and then you log in. So if I'm gonna, here I am, I'm logged in. It's Catherine Woods, my middle name. But this is what's available right now. So we have the state development grant. Christy is the administrator of that. And this is listed under opportunities here. It's a very basic applicant portal for you. It's not much, nothing much you can really do, not too much going on. It's pretty simple. And so if you would open up that opportunity, this is what would go. When you start to apply, this is your landing page. It tells you a little bit about, whoa, I'm locked up. Wait a second. What did I do? Oh my gosh. What? Oh, there's a second. Sorry about that. It's the end button. So this is the okay. All right. So this is the landing page for the application, and if I was going to push apply, ding, this is the first question on the state development grant. Is your property listed in the National Register of Historic Places? If no, then this is the last question for you. But if yes, then there are pages to complete. And it's exact same questions as the paper form that some of you have probably filled out, as well as the survey and planning. We're just getting it to electronic and getting away from paper. So the idea is to make it easier to submit things. And like I said, if you have once we get this up and running, if you have a question now, please let me know. I'm here Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. And I wanted to do a real quick, everyone here we are. We're looking at the map viewer. Exciting. So
I think you still need to change the screen over what you're sharing, Susan.
What do you mean?
I think if you do what you're presenting at the bottom there, then you'll have to share a new tab or something along those lines.
Okay. Okay. No, that's not me. I don't, that's not coming up. No, I
Yeah,
guess,
maybe if you stop presenting and then hit present again, and it'll give you the options for share a tab or.
yeah, is that right?
See,
Does that
yep,
work?
that looks good.
All right. So, I'm sorry? Yes. So sorry about that. This is the overview of West Virginia. This is the, like I mentioned, the National Register locations here. We've got a little cluster here. So I'm going to zoom, search to, well, it's actually, I'm sorry, let's start over here. Here is the legend I had mentioned before. If you zoom in, you see we've got architecture, site points, areas, survey areas, cemeteries, cemetery areas, National Register, and the National Register districts. A lot of information here. And for reference, if you zoom in, say you wanted to bring up some, here we are, and you wanted to bring up some parcel layers and address layers. I'm going to turn off the architecture surveys. They can get a little cumbersome. And so you can browse around. And here in Glenville, see what's in the map. And then you change the base map. Maybe you wanted that to be an aerial. You can see better of the ground. You can also change it to a Bing map, topography. We have an elevation map, which is pretty neat. So lots of options there. And then the searching here, we're going to search by name, and we've got Dimydale is up for nomination. So let me turn back on the survey because we see a survey here. So there's a lot of to think. They're up for nomination for a National Register Historic District. So we've got something from 2021 and the Dimydale Intensive Level Historic Research Survey. Bring that up. And we'll open up this report, ROH-19. That's the 19th Architecture Survey for Ohio. And it's 51 pages. So lots of good information here in the map. And while we're, and yeah. And last thing I want to say, as you probably know, we have a wonderful calendar. Sort of get out of here. I'm sorry. And just wanted to say, if you're not on the calendar, please let me know. We'll get you on the historic preservation calendar. I imagine most of you are. But just a little side note. Any questions? All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. All right. Okay, so the very last presentation we'll have is, of course, the CLG program. So we're actually going to talk about the beginnings of the program and how we operate the CLG program here in West Virginia. So the CLG program really kind of kicked off through, as we sort of talked about earlier, this sort of movement towards social history, focusing on the lived experience of individuals that was occurring in the 1960s and 70s across the US. There was really a lot more interest in identifying and preserving buildings associated with everyday community-focused history. You know, looking more at like your blacksmiths and your cobblers and your grocers instead of your, you know, presidents of the United States. So really focusing in on the importance of our own communities in local areas. So This is spurred by the growth of malls, shopping centers, and things of that nature that lead to people leaving downtowns, historic downtown buildings, and moving out towards suburban areas and areas of sort of generica, the term we talked about earlier. So the NHPA was amended in 1980 to reflect these changes in preservation and in history itself and the focus thereof. So that included the CLG program in 1980, which is you all. So the purpose of the program is to identify and protect historic resources and cultural heritage for and by local communities. So what exactly is a CLG? The certified part comes from the National Park Service. So the Park Service itself is the one certifying your local government. And we are, of course, a go-between of sorts, where we're helping you organize your application and things. But essentially, the program is a partnership between local, state, and federal governments. It is a result of that certification process, which is including a local ordinance. That ordinance can be tailored to the desires of your community. So if you want design review, you want more strict guidelines and things of that nature, your local ordinance will reflect that. But if you prefer a more hands-off preservation approach, it will also reflect that. The CLG program makes the Historic Landmark Commission a legal component of the local government. So it's not a local historic society or anything of that nature. It is a functioning legal arm of your government. Just want to make that clear. So it's not about, you know, collecting artifacts and photos and things. It's about preserving your built community and encouraging that in your local citizenry. What you're doing through the CLG program is actually making a commitment to national historic preservation standards and to applying those standards equally to all historic resources in your communities. So those newer resources that we think, well, maybe they're not exactly historic yet, or maybe, you know, I grew up in this kind of house, so how can that be a historic house? We're really trying to make sure that we're equally applying the term historic to all resources that could be evaluated as such in your communities. So even if you don't find that architectural style to be historic or beautiful or, you know, worth preserving, we still have to make sure we're applying that criteria. Again, the program is focusing on preserving, protecting, and identifying cultural heritage, as well as just increasing awareness of that heritage. You can, through the program, provide input in community revitalization, economic development, heritage tourism, and of course, you're wrapping all of that into public participation. So ultimately, the CLG program is also trying to enact more participation from local folks in historic preservation. So if that's a CLG, what is a Historic Landmarks Commission, and can we use them interchangeably? The answer is no. Landmarks Commissions are really the administering body of a CLG. So the government itself is a certified local government. The functioning organization is a Historic Landmarks Commission in West Virginia. That takes on different forms in different states. Some have historic preservation commissions, some have architectural review boards. We call them Historic Landmarks Commissions here in West Virginia. Those commissions include 5 commission members per state code. Some have more or less, but the code is enforcing that 5 commission member number. HLCs are developing, surveying, and inventorying local districts, building sites, object structures, all of those resources we've touched on. So you're the ones who are on the ground saying, you know, maybe that building does need to be listed, or maybe we should do an HPI form on that property. So you might encourage local folks to do that themselves, or you might take that initiative and do those new resource surveys. There are many, many ways to get that on our radar. The commission can itself establish design guidelines or design review. And then in that case, you may issue certificates of appropriateness. So that is where you are actually reviewing new design, new construction, alterations, and things like that to buildings in the community to ensure compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards. That does not have to happen. You don't have to have a commission that has that, but we do have a number of commissions that have design review in West Virginia. The program allows the HLCs to comment on new nominations to the National Register. So any sort of nomination that may or may not be something you think is appropriate is something you're allowed to, we encourage you to let us know about through our process. If you are a CLG and there is a historic resource that is going to be nominated in your area, you will be notified before it goes before our commission, and your comments will be taken into consideration very seriously. You also have the ability to review governmental undertakings on historic properties through the Section 106 process. Our Section 106 historians will be discussing that tomorrow during their Section 106 talk. So you'll get the full rundown on what that is and how you participate. You also can create public education programs, heritage tourism activities, brochures, walking tours, lectures, publications, marker programs, anything that you think is going to benefit your community, that's going to raise awareness, that's going to encourage more preservation, we encourage. So, and then lastly, if you are working closely with your local government, the rest of your local government, you may have the ability to review local zoning ordinances, subdivision proposals, development projects. That is just sort of a, depending on your status and depending on your connection to other branches in the government. But those are always great things to be a part of as well. See, in West Virginia, we have 54 certified local governments, not all of whom are active, but that is generally the number that we work with here. We've got 19 countywide CLGs, and these are all those in blue that are the bigger block sections. And then we have 35 city or town-wide CLGs, which are usually the smaller kind of funkier shapes and such. So, okay. So requirements of CLGs. So to be a CLG, we're looking that you are having an adequate and qualified historic commission and having that established. That can mean different things for every commission. Again, if you're doing design review, you might want a commission that has a little bit more background in historic preservation, folks who have experience in, working in contracting, or architects. Those are all people you might want to consider adding. If you are not reviewing design review projects, maybe your adequate and qualified definition can change a little bit. But if you need some input, if you don't have necessarily the expertise on your commission for a certain review or a certain project, you are expected to reach out for qualified expertise, including to our office here at the SHPO primarily, and sometimes the National Park Service if necessary, to fulfill that expertise and have that with you. So we're always glad to help as needed there. You also have to provide for adequate public participation in the form of open meetings and events that are announced publicly, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. You must enforce appropriate state or local legislation for the designation and protection of historic properties. That is kind of a broad-ranging thing, and not every single local government has its own survey or inventory form. So a lot of times you all can kind of use the SHPO's documentation procedures and use our HPI forms and our methods and things like that. So it kind of goes in conjunction with the second point there. And then lastly, satisfactorily performing responsibilities delegated to it by our office. So anytime we might have, again, questions about Section 106 projects, questions about National Register nominations, we just want to make sure that you're on board with discussing that with us. So your ordinances, called preservation ordinances on occasion, every single one of you has an ordinance. You have to by law. And so these are things that you can find either through your local government officials or through our office. Reach out to us if you don't have your ordinances readily available, if you aren't familiar with them, because it's very, very important that you are. These are really the defining codes that are used to enforce your program. So it'll tell you exactly what kinds of things that your CLG is capable of doing, and things of that nature. So anyway, your specific ordinance will include references to both federal and state codes which apply to you. So the federal code there, 36 CFR 61, is the federal code handed down to us by that legislation that was created in the 80s. So that's what we use to kind of as the overall umbrella of the CLG program. Our own state code is the Historic Landmarks Commission code there, and that gets into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of what our program requires. So some states require, say, a CLG to have design review. We do not require that. So that's a good way to identify what we require. And then of course it will have your own local procedures, responsibilities, and additions, and abilities, and things of that nature. So definitely take a look again. There's some other great rules and guidelines listed there as well. The HPF grants manual tells us how we break down the grant money that we are given and how we allocate that out to you all. So their chapter 9 actually discusses in good detail the program as well. So with those overarching ordinances, you also have bylaws or procedures, and these are discussing more of the day-to-day functionings that your HLC will be undertaking. It will talk about things like, or it should talk about things like the length of commission membership, officer terms, meeting procedures, designation of certain resources, planning for long-term serving. It will discuss certificates of appropriateness if that's something that your CLG is encompassing. It will talk about review, procedures, rules, any appeals that might come, enforcement, and it will talk about, of course, reporting responsibilities, which you're required to submit an annual report to our office on a yearly basis, and then we do a 4-year term, more in-depth review of each CLG as well. So for those of you who do have the more nitty-gritty technical design standards or guidelines, which do not have to be only used for CLGs that have design review. So even if you don't have design review, we still encourage you to have design standards or guidelines. These are really useful tools to ensure that you have something to point to and say, well, this is how we prefer you preserve the historic character of your district, even if you don't have that kind of iron rule, or at least an input through a design review. So standards really are formalized rules that are applied to a majority of projects. And we touched on that with the Secretary of the Interior standards earlier. Those are 10 bullet pointed, points that are very much overarching umbrella terms. They're not exactly nitty gritty. They don't talk about, how exactly you preserve a wood window, but they talk about the preservation of materials as a whole. So it can be applied to a majority of projects. The standards are really non-negotiable. They are pretty much something that you are adhering to no matter what. So they're very strict versus the guidelines, which are a little bit more, sort of under review and depending on the circumstances involved. The Secretary of the Interior standards are most often used or expanded or modified by commissions for standards because they are very applicable. They've been used time and time again through the national and state and local governments, so they seem to kind of last the test of time. So for an example of the difference between standards and guidelines here, the Secretary of the Interior standard number 5 talks about distinctive materials, features, finishes, and construction techniques, or examples of craftsmanship that characterize a property being preserved project. What a guideline might say is, given the rapid development of our city during the late 1940s and early 1950s, all mid-century design, including the distinctive prefabricated enamel steel coverings that are common throughout the city, should be preserved in place, even if covering an older facade. So it's really going to break down the specifics of your community. The guidelines they'll break down the specifics of your community, the common materials seen in your community, and how we use preservation to preserve the fabric that's important to our communities. So if you do have design review authority, you will have a certificate of appropriateness, or a COA for short. The ordinance will give you that review authority. So that is only established through your preservation ordinance. And it will stop essentially things like this window infill on the left here from happening under the guise of the Historic Landmarks Commission. So you might work with the project or the building owner to say, well, instead of infilling these windows, maybe let's come up with a cheaper way to replicate the windows that are broken in a way that fits the rough opening. So anyway, that's generally what a COA would kind of do. So the designation of a local historic district, again, that goes through public approval, gives your commission an area of review. So the zoning map in your town will have that designated as your district for review. The commission who is reviewing that may request any reasonable information from a COA applicant to determine the project's appropriateness. So you'll go through and look at drawings, look at photographs, look at kind of examples in the community and things of that nature to determine how appropriate a project might be. You will have a public hearing where you are giving an advance notice of time and place, given usually by the newspaper and posted at the meeting place 7 days prior to the meeting. So we really want to make sure that the public is not surprised by any of these public hearings or public meetings, and make sure that everyone is fully aware that this is happening. You as a commission, by the state guidelines, have 45 days to approve or reject an application. That may change if you need additional information. State law acknowledges technical feasibility challenges and economic hardship may allow HLCs to, quote, vary or modify strict adherence to provisions, which provisions in this sense is kind of your guidelines or your standards, so long as the decision remains in harmony, quote unquote, with provisions. So that's kind of our state law saying that technical feasibility, if it's a project that seems really undoable, it's just too challenging or it's too expensive, you may be allowed to vary or modify strict adherence to your guidelines or your standards. Commissions must keep records of all COAs and proceedings. So anytime you're working with a COA, you really want to document this well. You want to document when you get it, any correspondence between you and the applicant, any proceedings at the actual event, the actual public meeting, and then any the final decision and any comment. Any appeals can go to the circuit court in the county. And then ordinary maintenance or repair is usually not subject to review. It does depend on your locality. But that is essentially a rundown of the state's COA policy. Conflicts of interest. So this usually occurs in the case of a COA, in the case of design review, where a conflict of interest may occur. And commission members must avoid any involvement in a review in which they have professional, personal, or financial stakes. So you have to recuse yourself of any discussion, hearing, or decision making if you know that you have any of these stakes in a project or a property or the person who's undertaking that work. It's really best to make sure your communication is very clear very early on with your other commission members to make sure that you're not having a conflict of interest or having a perceived conflict of interest. So really want to make sure that you're being very, very open and clear about all this. Some examples of conflicts of interest: a professional conflict might be that an applicant is your employer. You're the architect for the project. You might be on the applicant's board of directors, even if it's a different operation. So say a local museum comes to apply and you're on their board, you might not want to be involved in that review. Personal conflicts, of course, that's fairly standard, you know, close friend, daughter, spouse, parent, you know, those are all folks who, if they were to apply through you, you'd want to recuse yourself from that review. And then financial conflicts, which can get a little trickier. This might be as simple as you owning the property in question. It might be something like the value of your property would be directly affected by the decision. It might be that you own the property adjacent to the property reviewed. So, you know, I know some smaller towns, it's kind of hard to avoid being near a project if you live in the district, but just as best you can, make sure that you're avoiding these conflicts. Impartiality, of course, is essential to an HLC's function. Again, you are a legal arm of the local government, so when you're acting in your role, we recommend not specifically endorsing any contractors or consultants, instead working to ensure that the correct procedure is being undertaken and that work will adhere to the standards or guidelines that your ordinance and that your procedures have. So those are really key, sort of, again, trying to make sure that you're remaining impartial as a component of local government. Meetings and public participation. Meetings are required to be held at regular intervals, at least 4 times yearly. Some commissions meet much more regularly, every 2 weeks or so. Some meet, again, just that 4 times a year. Just depends on the amount of work you're doing and what projects you're undertaking at the time, as well as if you review any design. So minutes must be taken at each regular meeting and include the date, time, and place of the meeting, as well as the names of each member of the governing body present, absent, etc. You don't have to include the names of folks who are just in the audience, you know. All motions, proposals, resolutions, orders, ordinances, and measures proposed, as well as the person proposing that, must be recorded as well. Results of all the votes and anything along those lines, you know, roll call for votes and things of that nature must be recorded as well. So make sure you keep those recorded and keep those in a place that are easily accessible, generally with the government, you know, the local government itself. So date, time, and place, and an agenda of all regularly scheduled meetings is to be dispensed to the public and news media at least 2 weeks in advance, which is what we prefer. The state has specific guidelines as well for that. And special meetings are much the same. We just want to make sure that everyone is aware of these meetings and can attend, or at least be aware that they're happening. So the benefits of being a CLG, we've kind of touched on some of the benefits of keeping your property eligible for inclusion in the National Register, but the benefits of the CLG program itself include the protection of investment for local property owners. So if you are maintaining these historic guidelines and procedures, generally the property values will either be kept the same or grow as time goes on. So you're not having a bunch of improper care in your local district for buildings, or really bad, you know, replacements and things like that that might decrease the property value. Again, the HLCs have been found to promote smart growth. They encourage better, more innovative design. So you're not just kind of going with the first thought, but kind of coming up with a more creative solution to design problems. Enhancing the sense of place and pride in local community is big. You can always tell when you're in, say, Lewisburg, like here, when you can see this beautiful building from 1897. So these kinds of things are key to your local image. Benefit the environment. The old saying in preservation, of course, is that the greenest building is one that's already been built. And that is true. Of course, it is good for the environment to keep the buildings that are in use. So that's key. Education, of course, historic buildings give a sense of understanding of our communities and what they looked like in the past. So with this building in the background here, you can see at the top it says bank. So it was a bank building, and it is no longer today, as far as I'm aware, unless they changed it. But you can see that in the past, that's what was the cornerstone of the community. So these buildings help a person come to a community and understand it and be able to read that community. Positive economic impact from tourism, of course. Tourism always grows in a much more historic district and area. You want to be in a place that has that kind of cozy historic feeling instead of something that's very generic. Enhancing business recruitment, of course. More and more people are moving away from the strip malls and the malls and coming back towards downtowns, and using these historic buildings to start brand new businesses, different ventures and things that really create a sense of community. Provide opportunity for public involvement, of course. And then lastly, grant funding. So 10% of all of what we receive from the federal government through the HPF funding must be allocated to CLGs each year. So that 10% has to go to you all. So we really encourage you to apply for our survey and planning grants where that funding is made available, because it is money specifically set aside for you all. And to that point, I'll just kind of briefly touch on our survey and planning grants. Christy Moore, our grants coordinator, is going to talk about this more tomorrow, but just so that you all are aware, and thinking about potential projects. Survey and planning grants are allocated out yearly. They're due October 31st of each year. It's a 70-30 match for CLGs, so we provide 70% of the funding, you provide 30%, so it's a very good deal. And it can include a wide variety of projects. It's not just for identifying new resources or placing them on the register. It can be that, but it can also be funding workshops or lectures. So in the bottom right-hand corner there, you see a masonry workshop that Weston put on last year. And they brought in Bob Yap, who's a really, really renowned historic preservationist. He had a show on PBS a number of years ago. And he's just a really great person to work with and learn from. So they brought him in to teach all these folks here how to properly repoint on a historic building downtown that needed repointing. So you can kind of come up with creative ways to undertake new projects in new ways through the survey and planning grants. These projects can also be for pre-development, like with the Coup Events building in Wheeling. So anything that is sort of kind of planning for new use of a space can be used with the survey and planning grants. Preservation needs assessment. So if you have a building and you just don't know where to begin with it, preservation needs assessment is a great tool. And this is a great way to start understanding exactly what resources need the most attention the soonest. So that can be funded. Archaeological surveys, which we've done a number of in the past on old Revolutionary era forts. So if you have any archaeological resources that maybe need surveying, this is a great way to do it. And then of course, creating booklets or any sort of materials for your residents that will describe the CLG program can be used. This can be used for them. Development grants are another tool that our office uses. This is a grant for physical preservation. So it's the actual hands-on technical preservation. We also offer tax incentives, which again, we'll touch on more tomorrow. The state historic tax credit, the federal historic tax credit can provide a lot of great funding to commercial and residential properties throughout the state. So working with our office, the SHPO, again, you can work with us in consulting on new nominations. You can consult on Section 106 reviews. You can use us for technical advice, HLC advice, planning advice, just an ear if you're kind of going through a tough time with some aspect in your commission or your local government. We can try to give you as much advice as we can. Give you other folks to reach out to and things of that nature. We're going to try to hold more workshops and trainings. We're going to try to have a camp training from the National Preservation Commission, yes, NAPC. So we're going to try to do that in the coming year or so. You'll want to work with us in submitting your annual report 60 days after the end of your local fiscal year. For most of you, that would be in the June area of time, but some of you kind of do the calendar years, some of you do entirely different years altogether. So, you all know what your fiscal year is. And then, of course, I send out newsletters every 2 months or so, just to keep us up to date on new grant opportunities and things of that nature. So keep an eye out for those. And if you aren't on that mailing list, let me know. And then working with your community. So like I said, you are a branch of the local government in a way. You're your own functioning entity, but you are a part of your local government. So we really want to make sure that you are working with the folks in your local government to develop a shared vision for your downtown. So if there is like a Main Streets organization or your local CVB, those are things you might want to get in touch with. Those are folks you might want to know and kind of work with them as best you can. So you want to partner together with those folks to identify historic resources. I know, we're all busy and we have all these things going on, so it might be nice to hear from someone else who has an idea about listing something that we might not have thought of. So that's a great way to do that. Promote the use of our grant funding. So you all get grant funding through the HPF, but that grant funding is also open to any member of the public, private or public. They can use those. So definitely make sure to make that known. Of course, developing educational programming, that's also very key, and promoting preservation through any workshops or lectures. Those are really cool ways to do it. If you have like a let's learn how to reglaze a window workshop or something, that is something that I think a lot of homeowners find very beneficial. Okie dokie. That I think is it for me today. So if you do have any questions, let me know. Let's see. Yeah, Guy, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, great. Thank you, Meredith. Can you talk a little bit about enforcement, what you recommend CLGs do? We have, my understanding here in Harpers Ferry is our enforcement powers are very tenuous and ambiguous. I mean, we don't have fines. What is it? Is a CLG approach to compliance carrot only, or do you advise that CLGs look at utilizing fines or other mechanisms for ensuring enforcement?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And it really does depend on the community and what the public perception might be in that case. A lot of folks who do have more of a strict enforcement with fines and things of that nature have had these for a number of years, and it can be kind of tricky nowadays to get everybody on board with something like that. I'd also like to open that question up to anybody else who is a commission member somewhere who does have experience with enforcement. Anything of that nature. Because like I said, it can be tricky, and we can also discuss this down the road too, Guy, and kind of come up with some ideas.
Okay, great. Well, if people are stewing on that, the other one thing I wanted to ask about where do you stand on telephone poles?
On like new telephone poles, or
We have telephone poles here in Harpers Ferry that over 50 years old, right? And our skies are a real tangle of all kinds of wires, and not just power but communications. And we'd like to bury them. I'd like to bury them. I'm trying to build consensus around burying them. But has that ever come up in a historic preservation context? That is there funding? Is there funding for towns to help do things like bury power and communication lines to improve the environment here?
right? Yeah, I mean, from a historic preservation office perspective, we don't offer any funding that would work for that. But Skip has his hand raised, so maybe I'll let you go ahead.
When we first started preservation in Lewisburg, going back, gosh, 50 some years ago or more. One of the first things we did was to but to move the telephone lines from our main street, which is Washington Street, behind all the commercial buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a foundation, Lewisburg Foundation, which is separate from the Historic Landmarks Commission. And they were able to get some funding from and support from the power company, in addition to, I think, some private funds. But it probably wasn't one of the most significant things we've ever done in town. I think it really began to showcase the buildings that we have in Lewisburg.
Yeah, yeah. So they also mutilate our trees. I mean, we've got the most mangled, pathetic looking trees because they're sometimes sawed in half right down the middle where the wires go. So it's just it's one of those things. It's we're working on kind of 100-year vision. However long it's going to take. How do we start getting it done?
Right, Addison, you've got your hand up.
It's just along those lines. I'm on the Jefferson County Landmarks Commission, and we're struggling with the Planning Commission even waiving requirements like for archaeological surveys and things like that. And they consider a non-response, even they don't give much notice. Sometimes they consider that as though we don't have concerns about it. So, I mean, we're struggling at that level. So.
Well, okay, that's all I had. Thanks, Meredith.
All right, thanks, Scott. Yeah, we'll talk about that enforcement and such because I think it is pretty specific, the different communities. So I made a note. Okay, any other questions? Well, seeing none, I think we'll probably wrap it up for the day. And I just want to thank you all for being here and